Nathan was a well-known and respected figure in his community. Though many affectionately called him Sergeant, a nickname he had carried since his military service days, he never saw himself as a hero. At 70 years old, he lived a simple yet fulfilling life. Despite the emotional scars left by the war and the loss of his beloved wife, Nathan was a man who, above all, valued life and the time he had left. After his wife's death over a decade ago, Nathan went through a period of deep sadness. The empty house, once filled with life, seemed to swallow his will to keep going. His children had grown up and started their own families in other cities, so visits were sporadic. This left Nathan often alone, but he never allowed himself to be consumed by loneliness. He had always been resilient, something he had learned in the war and that helped him keep moving forward, even on the hardest days. In time, Nathan found a way to live with his sorrow. He began to appreciate the small things in life, his morning walks through the neighborhood parks, casual encounters with neighbors, and the coffee he drank every day at the same restaurant, always at the same table. He was still happy, in his own way. He enjoyed helping others when he could, whether it was holding a door open or offering advice to young people who respected him as a kind of father figure in the community. Nathan believed that, despite everything, life went on and that he still had something to offer the world. One day, as usual, Nathan decided to go to the local supermarket to do his weekly shopping. The market was a place where he felt part of something larger, where everyone knew him and greeted him with warm smiles. Even though his life was solitary, he enjoyed these small interactions, feeling that, in some way, he still belonged to the community. He walked through the aisles methodically, selecting the items he needed with precision. As he passed by the shelves, his thoughts wandered, reflecting on how time seemed to pass faster as he aged. Nathan was satisfied with his life, but he knew time waited for no one. He tried to make the most of his days, surrounding himself with small routines that gave him peace. However, when he reached the checkout to pay for his groceries, something unusual caught his attention. Sarah, a young woman in her early 30s, was just ahead of him in line. Around her, four small children were fidgeting, asking for snacks and toys while she tried to keep them under control. The exhaustion was evident on her face, and Nathan realized that she wasn't just a tired mother, there was something deeper there. There was a burden she carried, something that made her seem older than she really was. When the cashier announced the total for her groceries, Sarah's expression changed to one of desperation. She looked at the money in her hands and realized it wasn't enough. I need to return some items," she murmured in a low, almost defeated voice. She began to sort through her things, deciding what she could leave behind. The children, not understanding what was happening, began asking questions, and Sarah tried to calm them, though visibly distressed. Nathan, watching the scene, felt a sharp pang of compassion. He knew what it was like to carry the weight of responsibilities and not have enough. Though he had lived a modest life, he had never forgotten how hard life could be for many. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, and before Sarah could return anything, he approached the cashier. "Add her groceries to my bill, please," Nathan said in a calm and firm voice. Sarah turned, shocked, and looked at Nathan with wide eyes. She tried to refuse, shaking her head. "Sir, I can't accept, it's too much." "Please, accept it," Nathan replied with a gentle smile. "We all need a helping hand sometimes." The cashier, already familiar with Nathan, completed the transaction and handed him the change. "Thank you, Sergeant," he said, addressing him by the nickname everyone in the community used, a title of respect, a reminder of his past, though Nathan had never asked for it. Hearing the name Sergeant, Sarah seemed to have a flash of recognition. "Sergeant?" she asked, intrigued. "My father was in the military too. He was always a hero to me. Maybe you knew him?" Nathan raised his eyebrows, curious. Before he could say anything, Sarah took an old photo from her wallet, her hands trembling as she handed it to Nathan. "This was my father," she said. "He died when I was very young." Nathan took the photo, and the moment he looked at it, he felt the world around him stop. His eyes widened as he recognized the young soldier in the picture. It was a face he could never forget. Nathan still held Sarah's photo, but the world around him seemed to freeze. He stared at the young man in the image, feeling a mix of shock, pain, and memories that, until that moment, he believed were well buried in his past. The man in the photo was someone he could never forget. James Turner. Sarah looked at Nathan, confused by his reaction. He stood still, almost pale, as if something terrible had hit him. She grew concerned. "Are you all right?" she asked, stepping closer. Nathan, still staring at the photo, took a deep breath, feeling the weight of decades of guilt and longing intensify. He closed his eyes for a moment and returned the photo to Sarah, trying to find the right words to express what was on his mind. When he finally looked at her, the sadness on his face was clear. "I knew your father," he said, his voice coming out rougher than expected. Sarah, who hadn't anticipated that answer, widened her eyes in shock. The memories she had of her father were vague, stories told by her mother, old photographs, and a few childhood recollections. But hearing that this man in front of her had known her father left her speechless. "You knew him?" Sarah asked, almost in disbelief. "How? Where?" Nathan motioned for them to step out of the line and move to a quieter corner of the supermarket. He needed time, he needed space to process everything he was feeling. When they reached a more private area, he took a deep breath and began to speak. "Your father was a hero, Sarah. Not just to you, but to everyone who fought alongside him, including me." Nathan paused, recalling the crucial moment when their lives crossed paths. "He saved my life." Sarah listened intently, her hands tightly gripping the photo of her father. Nathan began to tell his story. He explained that during the war, he had served in the same platoon as James. They became fast friends. James was brave, smart, and had a sense of humor that lightened the weight of their missions. But it was during a brutal ambush that James's true heroism revealed itself. "We were surrounded," Nathan's voice dropped as he relived the moment. "It was an ambush. We were trapped, no reinforcements, and gunfire was coming from all sides. It was absolute chaos. No one knew what to do. I was hit. It wasn't serious, but enough to knock me down. I wouldn't have survived, Sarah. I would have died there." He paused, feeling the weight of his words. Sarah's eyes were fixed on him, as if every detail he revealed was a piece of the puzzle of her own life story. "But your father, James. He threw himself in front of me, took the bullets that were meant for me. He sacrificed his life so I could live. He died in that ambush." Nathan stopped, the lump in his throat making it hard to continue. "And since that day, I've carried the guilt of surviving when he couldn't." Sarah couldn't hold back her tears. She had always known her father was a hero, but hearing that story, directly from someone who had been with him in his final moments, was overwhelming. Now, everything made sense. The silence between them was heavy, filled with emotions neither Sarah nor Nathan could fully express. "He was an incredible man, Sarah," Nathan finally broke the silence. "And I feel like I failed him by not being able to save his life." Sarah quickly wiped away her tears, trying to absorb everything that had been said. She had never known the truth about her father's death. Her mother had always been vague, only mentioning that he died in combat. But now, hearing the full story, she felt a mix of pride and sadness. "You didn't fail him," Sarah replied softly. "My father knew what he was doing. He did what any hero would do." Nathan looked at Sarah, surprised by her maturity and how, in a few words, she managed to ease a guilt he had carried for decades. That encounter felt like something destiny had orchestrated. He never imagined he would meet the daughter of the man who had saved his life, but now that she was standing before him, he felt there was a greater reason for it. "I didn't know James had a daughter," Nathan said, trying to collect his thoughts. "I never knew." Sarah gave a sad smile. "I was very young when he died. My mother always talked about him, but never shared many details about the war. She thought I didn't need to know everything, that it would be better that way. But now I know." Nathan nodded, understanding Sarah's mother's choices. It was hard to talk about the war, especially with children. He himself rarely spoke about what he had lived through during those times, except when the conversation inevitably led him to think of James. They stood in silence for a few moments. There was much to process, but now, at least, Nathan felt the truth had been revealed, and a part of his past was finally being resolved. Perhaps he could never make up for James's loss, but meeting Sarah was the first step toward the redemption he had long sought. Nathan returned home that night with a mind full of thoughts, reliving every detail of the conversation with Sarah. The memories of James Turner and the war, which had long been buried in his heart, now resurfaced with an intensity he hadn't expected. James had a daughter. The daughter of the man who had given his life for him, and now she was standing before his eyes, struggling alone to raise 4 young children. Nathan spent much of the night reflecting on the encounter at the supermarket. He couldn't allow himself to believe it was just a coincidence. There was something more, something bigger than he could explain. He felt this was a unique opportunity, perhaps even the last great opportunity of his life, to honor James's sacrifice. But he didn't want to help Sarah out of remorse or guilt. No. He wanted to repay the second chance at life James had given him by offering Sarah and her children a second chance too. As he walked through the quiet house, he thought about what he could do to truly help them. Sarah was clearly a strong and determined woman, but she was overwhelmed. Nathan recognized that look of struggle, that constant exhaustion that gave no respite. He saw in Sarah's eyes the same determination James had, and it moved him. He knew he couldn't change the past, but he could use the second chance at life he had been given to give James's daughter an opportunity to start over. But Nathan's help wouldn't come in a superficial way. He wanted to do more than just give money or pay bills. He wanted to become part of Sarah's and her children's lives, to offer them what James never had the chance to: protection, guidance, and support. He knew this wouldn't bring his friend back, but at least it would be a way to continue Turner's legacy, a legacy of sacrifice and unconditional love. The next morning, Nathan made his decision. He would find Sarah, not to repay a debt, but to honor James's memory in a way that made sense for both of them. He dressed and headed out to the supermarket, hoping to see her again. He wasn't sure what he would say, but he knew he needed to act. When he arrived at the market, Nathan searched for Sarah, but she wasn't there. Frustrated, he decided to come back later. He wouldn't give up. Something inside him said this was an important mission, something he couldn't let slip away. It was only on the 3rd visit that day that he finally saw her. Sarah was leaving the store with her children. Nathan hurried over to her, feeling a mix of relief and nervousness. "Sarah," he called, waving. Sarah turned, surprised to see him again. She smiled kindly but was clearly puzzled by the encounter. "Mr. Nathan, what a coincidence to see you again." She smiled, but there was a hidden fatigue behind her eyes. Nathan approached slowly, unsure of how to start the conversation. He knew he had something important to say, but the words weren't coming easily. "It's not a coincidence, Sarah," he began sincerely. "I was looking for you. We need to talk." Sarah remained silent for a moment, not knowing what to expect. She was deeply grateful for what Nathan had done for her the previous day, but she didn't know what more he could want. He seemed like a good man, but it left her a little uneasy. "I know this might sound strange, but," Nathan hesitated, trying to find the right words. "After everything that happened yesterday, I spent the night thinking. Thinking about your father, about what he did for me, about what he gave me, a second chance at life." He took a deep breath before continuing. "I think now it's my turn to repay that, Sarah. I want to help you. Not out of guilt or debt, but because I feel it's the right way to honor your father's sacrifice. I want to give you a second chance, just like he gave me." Sarah blinked, confused and emotional. She didn't know what to say. There was a sincerity in Nathan's words that moved her deeply, but there was also concern. He wanted to help her, but why? Did he pity her? "Mr. Nathan, I appreciate so much what you did for me and my children. Truly. But I don't want you to feel obligated to anything. I'm not a burden. Nathan shook his head, interrupting her. "You're not a burden, Sarah. And I'm not doing this out of obligation or pity." He looked her directly in the eyes, his expression one of unshakable conviction. "I'm doing this because I want to. Because I feel this is the right thing to do. Your father gave me a second chance, and now I see the opportunity to do the same for you and your children. I can't bring James back, but I can make sure his sacrifice means something beyond the war." Sarah couldn't hold back her tears. Nathan's words had touched her heart in a way she hadn't expected. It was as if, suddenly, the burden she had been carrying was no longer hers to bear alone. The relief she felt was mixed with the emotion of knowing that, somehow, her father's legacy was still alive. "I don't know what to say," she murmured, wiping away her tears. "No one has ever done anything like this for me." Nathan smiled gently and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to say anything now." He looked at Sarah's children, who were playing nearby while they waited. "Just know that I'm here. If you need me, I'll be around." Sarah nodded, still in shock from everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. Somehow, that conversation with Nathan felt like a new beginning, something she had never imagined possible. Nathan, on the other hand, felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in many years. He wasn't just repaying a debt, he was finally honoring James's memory in a way that brought meaning and purpose to his life. In the days that followed, Nathan began to show up more often in Sarah's and her children's lives. Initially, he was cautious, afraid of overstepping or invading the family's space. He knew that the decision to accept his help had to come naturally, and he didn't want Sarah to feel obligated to anything. Nathan wasn't there to do charity, he wanted to create a genuine bond, something deeper and more meaningful than just offering assistance. Sarah, in turn, was also hesitant. Though deeply touched by Nathan's intentions, the pride she had built over the years of struggle was hard to ignore. She had survived on her own until now, and accepting help made her feel vulnerable. However, as the days passed, Nathan's sincerity began to break down those barriers. One quiet afternoon, Nathan decided to bring some fruit and groceries to Sarah's house. He didn't want it to seem like a grand gesture, just something simple, a way to show that he was around in a discreet but present way. When he arrived, he was greeted by the children, who were already getting used to his presence. To them, Nathan wasn't the sergeant the community respected, but the kind old man who always brought fruit and helped fix small problems around the house. "Hi, Grandpa Nathan," one of the boys shouted, running toward him and hugging his leg. Nathan smiled, surprised by the affectionate way he was addressed. He had never thought of himself as a grandfather, and it touched his heart in an unexpected way. "Grandpa, huh," he said, with a playful smile. "I'm not that old, am I?" The children laughed, and Nathan found himself wrapped in their innocent energy. It was as if, little by little, the emptiness he carried inside him began to dissipate. Being surrounded by this new life gave him a feeling of renewal that he hadn't experienced in years. Sarah watched the scene from a distance, feeling torn between relief and discomfort. Seeing her children happy with Nathan was a blessing, but accepting his help still felt like walking a fine line between gratitude and dependency. Even so, she couldn't deny that Nathan brought a sense of peace to her home, something she hadn't seen in a long time. That afternoon, while the children played in the yard, Sarah and Nathan sat at the small kitchen table. Sunlight streamed through the window, creating a calm atmosphere, but there was something that still needed to be said. "Nathan, I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've done for us," Sarah began, her voice soft but with a serious tone. "But at the same time, I feel strange accepting so much help. I've spent so long trying to do everything on my own that now, accepting this is hard." Nathan listened attentively, understanding her feelings. He had anticipated this conversation and knew he needed to be honest about his own motivations. "I understand, Sarah," he said in a comforting tone. "But please believe me, I'm not doing this so you'll feel indebted to me or to ease my guilt. In fact, guilt isn't what drives me now." He paused, searching for the right words. "Your father gave me a second chance at life when he sacrificed his own. I feel that chance was given to me for a purpose. And now, by helping you and your children, I feel like I'm using that second chance the way I'm supposed to." Sarah looked at Nathan with new eyes. He wasn't just a man trying to do something out of compassion, but someone who was seeking meaning in his own life while offering her family a new opportunity. She realized that, in a way, Nathan needed this connection as much as they needed him. "I never really knew my father," Sarah began, her voice trembling slightly. "But I know he would have been happy to know that you're here for us. Sometimes, I think about how different my life would have been if he had been around. But life hasn't been easy." She paused, taking a deep breath. "Maybe this is our second chance too." Nathan smiled, feeling that Sarah was finally starting to understand his intentions. "I'm not here to replace anyone, Sarah. I just want to make sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain. And for me, that means being here for you and your children. Not just as someone who helps, but as someone who truly cares." The silence that followed was one of mutual understanding. From that moment on, a new chapter began. Nathan wasn't just a man helping a family in need, he was becoming part of their lives in a deeper and more meaningful way. Sarah was beginning to accept that sometimes, accepting help wasn't a sign of weakness, but of strength. That afternoon, when Nathan left the house, he felt different. He felt that his life was gaining a new purpose, something he hadn't expected to find. He would return to his home, yes, but now there was something else waiting for him the next day. A new mission, a new life unfolding. And he was eager to continue this journey alongside Sarah and her children. As the weeks passed, Nathan began to feel closer to Sarah and her children. He was no longer just the sergeant from the neighborhood, but someone the family trusted and saw as a friend. The children adored him, and Sarah, little by little, allowed herself to depend more on his help and companionship. But beneath the apparent calm, both Nathan and Sarah knew there were bigger challenges ahead. One afternoon, while the children played in the yard and Nathan helped Sarah with some tasks around the house, she finally decided to open up about something she had been keeping to herself for a long time. Sarah's life had never been easy, and Nathan knew she had gone through many hardships, but until that moment, he didn't know the full extent of her struggles. They were sitting at the kitchen table, sunlight gently filtering through the window, creating a sense of tranquility. Nathan was talking about how he planned to help with some small improvements around the house, maybe painting the children's room, when Sarah suddenly fell silent, looking at her hands. "Nathan, I need to tell you something." Her voice was low, as if she were about to reveal a painful secret. Nathan stopped what he was doing and looked at her, sensing the gravity of the moment. "You can tell me anything, Sarah." "I'm here," he replied with calming reassurance. Sarah took a deep breath before beginning. "I never told you about the children's father." She paused, and Nathan mentally prepared for what was coming. "We met when I was very young, almost a teenager. It was a troubled relationship from the start. He wasn't a bad person, but he wasn't ready to be a father, let alone deal with family life. When I got pregnant with our first child, he disappeared. Left me alone with everything." Nathan didn't say anything, just listened attentively, knowing she needed to get it off her chest. "I tried to handle everything on my own, raised the boys by myself, and then, just when I thought I was starting to get stable, he showed up again. He came back, asking for forgiveness, promising to change." Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "I, foolishly, believed him. I thought things could be different, that he really wanted to build something with us. But things didn't change," Nathan softly added. Sarah nodded, tears beginning to gather in her eyes. "No. He stayed for a while, and then, when our fourth child was born, he left for good. I haven't heard from him since. And now, I'm here, alone again, raising the kids and trying to do my best, but, sometimes, I feel so exhausted. I look at my children and know they deserve more. More than I can give." Nathan felt a wave of sadness as he listened. He knew Sarah carried an immense burden, and now he understood just how lonely she truly felt. "You're not alone anymore, Sarah," Nathan said with unexpected firmness. "And I'm not saying that just because I want to help. I'm truly here for you and your children. I'm not their father, but I can be someone they can count on." Sarah looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "Nathan, I don't know how to thank you for all of this. You came into our lives at a time when I thought there was no hope left." Nathan smiled, gently holding her hand. "You don't need to thank me." He looked at the children playing outside, their laughter echoing through the house. "They are my chance to repay what your father did for me. I know James would have done anything to be here for you. And, in a way, that's what I'm doing. It's not a debt. It's an honor." Sarah wiped her tears, feeling a growing sense of relief. She knew life would still be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't facing it alone. Nathan wasn't just helping financially, he had become part of their lives, a constant presence that brought security and comfort. However, Sarah's revelation also made Nathan think about how he could help in a more lasting way. He began to think of ways to ensure that Sarah and her children had a more stable foundation for the future. He didn't want to be just temporary support, he wanted to create a long-term plan, something that would truly transform their lives. In the following days, Nathan decided that he would not only help Sarah with day-to-day needs, but also encourage her to return to school and find ways to rebuild her professional life. She was a strong woman, but she needed more opportunities, and Nathan was determined to find a way to provide that for her. As Sarah continued to share her story of struggles and resilience, Nathan realized just how much she was like James, not only in appearance but in spirit. Both had an inner strength that defied adversity, a will to fight that he deeply admired. But Nathan knew that, to truly help Sarah and her children rebuild their lives, he would need to do more than just offer emotional support. He would need to give her the tools to ensure her family's future. And with that in mind, Nathan began planning the next steps, not just for Sarah, but for himself, as part of something much larger than he had imagined when this all began. Time continued to pass, and with each day, Nathan became more deeply embedded in Sarah's and her children's lives. He was no longer just a visitor, he was part of the family, someone they trusted deeply. But there was still one thing that troubled Nathan: James Turner's sacrifice. Though he had found a way to repay it by helping Sarah and her children, Nathan felt there was something more that needed to be done, something that would honor James in a more concrete way. One evening, as he watched the children play in the yard, the idea of a memorial began to take shape in his mind. A tribute to James Turner, the man who had given Nathan his second chance at life, and also a way for Sarah and her children to connect more deeply with their father's legacy. That same night, Nathan decided to talk to Sarah about the memorial. "Sarah, I've been thinking," he began hesitantly, as they sat at the table after dinner. "Have you ever thought about doing something to honor your father? Something bigger, something that marks the importance of what he did?" Sarah looked at him, intrigued. It was something she had never considered. Though she had always respected and admired her father, the hardships of life had distanced her from the idea of tributes or memorials. She had never truly known him, only through stories. But seeing how James's sacrifice had impacted Nathan, she began to realize that perhaps this could also help her process her own grief in her father's absence. "I've never thought about it," Sarah admitted in a low voice. "But I think it would be a good idea. He deserves to be remembered, in a way that my children can also understand how important he was." Nathan smiled, pleased with her response. "Exactly," he continued. "I was thinking of something simple, but meaningful. We could organize a small ceremony, something involving the people closest to you. Maybe in the park, near the place where he's buried. You and the children could prepare something special. And I would like to say a few words." Sarah nodded, feeling moved by the idea. She had never had the opportunity to truly honor her father, and this seemed like the perfect chance to connect her life and her children's lives with his legacy. In the days that followed, Sarah and Nathan began to organize the memorial. The children, still too young to fully understand, helped with enthusiasm, drawing posters and decorating small thank you notes to the grandfather they had never known. For Sarah, this process was deeply emotional. She realized that the memorial wouldn't just be about her father but also about closing a chapter in her own life, a moment to accept the past and open up to the future. On the morning of the memorial, the park was calm and sunny, the perfect setting for what would be an important day for everyone. A small group of close friends, neighbors, and friends of Nathan, as well as Sarah and her children, were present. The ceremony began with Sarah, who, holding a photo of her father, shared a little about what she knew of him. It was the first time she had really spoken openly about her father to others. Her words were simple but full of emotion. "My father was a brave man. I've always known that, but I never knew him personally. Today, seeing him through Nathan's eyes and through my own struggles as a mother, I realize that, in some way, he has always been present in my life. This memorial is for him, but also for all of us, so that we can remember what it means to sacrifice for those we love." Sarah's words echoed in the hearts of everyone present, especially Nathan's. He knew that, in that moment, Sarah was beginning to free herself from the shadows of the past, embracing the life her father had helped preserve. Next, it was Nathan's turn to speak. He walked to the small, makeshift podium, took a deep breath, and began to tell the story he had carried with him for so many years. He spoke of James Turner's sacrifice, of the moment his life had been saved by that man, and how it had shaped everything that came after. "I wouldn't be here if it weren't for James Turner," he said, looking at Sarah and her children. "But more than that, I wouldn't have had the chance to repay the second chance at life he gave me. Today, by helping Sarah and these wonderful children, I feel like I'm finally honoring James's sacrifice the way he deserves. Not because I have to, but because it's the right thing to do." Nathan looked at James's photo, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. This is his legacy. This family, this life. And I am deeply grateful for the opportunity to be part of it. The silence that followed Nathan's words was full of meaning. The people around, even those who didn't know the full story of James, felt the weight of those words and the depth of what Nathan had experienced. After the ceremony, as the people dispersed, Nathan and Sarah stayed a little longer, watching the children run through the park. There was a quiet peace in the air, a sense that something had finally been resolved. "I think he would be proud of us," Sarah said, looking at her father's photo. Nathan nodded, with a soft smile. "I'm sure he would." As they left the park, Nathan realized something important: that memorial wasn't just a tribute to the past, but also a new beginning. He and Sarah were ready to move forward, carrying James's legacy with them, but creating a new story together, full of hope and possibilities. Months had passed since the memorial in the park, and Sarah's and her children's lives were starting to take a new direction. The bond between her and Nathan had only grown stronger, and together, they had created a routine that brought stability and hope to everyone. Nathan had found renewed purpose in helping Sarah build a better life for herself and her children, and Sarah, in turn, had begun to walk a path of new opportunities. On that day, Sarah's house was filled with celebration. The children ran through the living room, excited by the presence of friends and neighbors, while Nathan and Sarah prepared dinner in a festive atmosphere. Sarah had taken a big step in her life. She had returned to her studies, something she never believed was possible until Nathan encouraged and supported her. She held her GED diploma with a smile that couldn't be contained. It was an achievement that had seemed distant months ago when she could barely think about the future. Now, with Nathan by her side and her children more stable, Sarah saw a much more promising future. "I never thought I'd make it this far," she said to Nathan, as they both watched the children playing in the yard. Nathan smiled, full of pride. "You've always had that strength, Sarah. You just needed a chance to show it to the world," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And now that you've taken this first step, nothing can stop you." Sarah looked at Nathan with gratitude, feeling the weight of everything he had done for her and her children. He hadn't just helped financially, he had given her the opportunity to rise, to be independent, and to find her own strength. "I'll never be able to thank you enough, Nathan," she said, her voice full of emotion. "You didn't just give me a second chance. You gave a new life to me and my children." Nathan shook his head. "You did it yourself, Sarah. I was just there to remind you of what you were already capable of." He smiled, but there was deep satisfaction in his words. James would be very proud. Her father's name still stirred mixed feelings in Sarah, a mixture of pain from his absence and pride in his legacy. But now, James's name wasn't just a memory of the past but a symbol of everything she had overcome and achieved. The relationship between Sarah and Nathan had transformed. It was no longer just about James Turner's sacrifice. Now, they were a family. Nathan had taken on the role of a grandfather to the children, and Sarah saw him as a father figure and mentor. As the sun began to set and the children ran toward the dinner table, Sarah approached Nathan once again. "You know, I never imagined life would take this turn. I thought I was doomed to live that same reality forever. But you showed me that the future is something we can shape, even after all this time." Nathan looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and affection. "The future is yours, Sarah. And your children's," he replied, watching the children smile and play around the table. "And I'm grateful to be part of it." With Nathan's support, Sarah was already making plans for the future. Now, in addition to having completed her studies, she was beginning to think about how she could advance professionally and secure an even more stable future for her children. She knew the road would still be long, but for the first time, she was ready to face it. As they sat down for dinner, Sarah held Nathan's hand and smiled. "We're just getting started." Nathan nodded, feeling an inner peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. James's legacy had been honored, but more than that, a new story had been written. A story of overcoming, family, and second chances. And that night, surrounded by laughter and love, Nathan knew that James's sacrifice had not been in vain. They were together. A new family. And they were ready for whatever came next. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment, and check out our next story.